Good evening. Good evening. Welcome. There's still a few seats. I see a few over here. Boy, I love this standing room only crowd. This is great. Fantastic. I'm Bertie Patterson. I'm the chancellor at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And I just want to say thank you for coming out tonight. This is a very important evening, important conversation, important information. The great thing about a university is it's where we welcome a diversity of ideas and where we welcome the creation of new data. And that's what universities do, and that's what universities foster. So your being part of that process tonight is really, really important. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the discussion. And let us all leave here better informed than we were when we arrived. And with that, I want to introduce Senator Lassa and Representative Shanklin to give us a welcome.
Thank you so much, Chancellor Patterson, and thank you so much to UW-Stevens Point for hosting us and their beautiful facility. We really appreciate all of your hard work in helping us put this on. So the legislators who requested this presentation tonight, I want to recognize them all. First of all, Senator Lassa, me, I'm Representative Shanklin, Senator Coles, Senator Olson, Representative Krug, who's in the audience, and will be able to address you all at the end of the presentation, and Representative Vandermeer, who's also here tonight. So thank you all for being here, and we're excited to hear from the DNR and USGS.
Great. Well, I am very happy that all of you are here tonight. Many of you I recognize from a couple of years ago when it was 20 below zero, it was dark, and we were all crammed into the village of Plover Hall to hear about the Little Plover River study. And it's been a couple of years, and we had asked for the DNR as well as the USGS and the Natural History Survey to come and update us on not only the study, but the optimization model that has come out of that study. And I think it really helps to provide the state as well as our local area here in central Wisconsin with a way forward. And I think that is so important because we really do need to get everyone at the table to figure out our groundwater needs, uses, and where we move in the future. And that's why I'm so happy that all of you are here tonight, because it really shows that there's a lot of interest and willingness to work together to move a solution forward. And so what I'd like to do now is turn things over to Dan Hansel, and he's going to be introducing the team of experts that will be presenting tonight, as well as answering your questions.
Great, full house, you guys. First of all, on the department's behalf, I want to thank you for attending and for your interest in this very important issue for the state. The state's been struggling with it for a very long time, and it's great to see so many people and so many legislators really interested in solving this issue. So I'm going to give a little background on the Little Plover River project itself, just a few slides to put everybody kind of on the same page of where we're at with the Little Plover River, and then kick it off to really the people who did the science for us and for the state of Wisconsin. That's Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Fienen. So let me start with a few slides. And I think we've kind of agreed, since this is a lot of information and some of it very technical and even way above my head, is that if you could save questions till we get up here at the panel, John Exo and some other folks will help moderate those questions. And so if you have some questions that are really detailed, if you write them down, that would be really helpful, and we'll take questions at the very end of the presentations, and we'll hopefully have about an hour for those questions before it gets too late. So everybody's kind of familiar with the Central Sands, we hope. It's a big area, the central part of the state. It's agricultural, and it's forested, and it's trout streams and lakes. And we know the kind of the pressures the surface waters and our resources are under. In the 1960s, we had about 120 wells in this part of the state. In the 1985 area, we had about 1,200 high-capacity wells. And as we move into the present day, we have about 2,800 wells. So we can see all these high-capacity wells are intersecting with our surface waters, and we know it's a big issue. We need to figure this out. The Little Plover River was really been studied for a long time. We have some people in the audience like Dr. Kraft that have done a lot of work in the Little Plover River and really good work. And so this was really a great setting for the department to contract with the two principal investigators to work on the Little Plover River. Remember, the river went dry in 2005, and it started a work group that was spearheaded by the department and some really key stakeholders around the Little Plover River. Dan Ballman, our Secretary's Director in the West District, kind of helped that group move forward. In 2009, the department set some public rights stage flows in the Little Plover at 4 locations. And those are flows that we can use as kind of the best optimization of healthy flow in the river and target those for optimization. And in 2013, the department and the state kind of recognized, hey, we need a little bit more of an advanced tool to evaluate water use management on streams and lakes almost on a monthly basis, which is something we didn't really have in the past, that also considered what the wells are withdrawing. So that's really what you're going to see tonight, is a tool that helps us get to that point of evaluating different management solutions. So the next steps for this department is, unfortunately, the professors have to go through a peer review process, which is very extensive. So that report may not be released in final form for a while, but we expect to have a report or the model itself in our hands relatively soon, hopefully by this summer, that we can start to use after the peer review is finalized. We hope the model will inform future policy that the state's going to have to consider at the legislative arena. And it'll also allow the department to work with stakeholders to develop some water management scenarios, you know, whether those are deepening ponds or dams or moving wells, those kind of things. And the department's also positioned now to work with the stakeholders and legislators to move this methodology out to other parts of the state, larger parts of the Central Sands, where it's really going to be a useful tool for us to evaluate water use in the future. So with that, I'll introduce Dr. Ken Bradbury, who's going first, and then Dr. Mike Fienen, who will do his second part on optimization. And I appreciate you holding your questions, and we'll look forward to talking with you at the end of the session.
All right, well, thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for coming. It's really exciting to have an opportunity to talk about the work we've done together for the last couple of years. I don't know if it's possible to lower the lights a little bit here. Oh, well. So I point out that I'm Ken Bradbury, Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. Mike is with the U.S. Geological Survey. We are part of UW Extension. Mike's part of the federal government, so this has been a good partnership with the DNR in doing this project, and we have some others, Maribeth Niffen and Jake Krause, who are two of our students who worked on this as well. So I'm going to talk about 3 things here: the objectives and the status of the report, how our model has been constructed, and some examples of model use. Mike is going to step in and then talk about some of the optimization and some optimization scenarios that he's worked on. I've given a number of talks on this, and I always want to put the objectives, make the objectives clear to people, and I think they're on the handout we gave you as well, what this project was for. The project was for developing a model, a flow and optimization model, as a science-based tool for decision support for water management. The Little Plover is sort of a test case for this. Eventually, we'd like to do a tool that can cover the whole of central Wisconsin, and maybe even similar tools for other parts of Wisconsin, because there are similar issues in other parts of the state. So this is sort of a test case right now. We want to be able to demonstrate some fundamental principles and constraints about hydrogeology and how groundwater, surface water systems work. And we want to have an educational tool, because a model can be an educational tool as well to help people understand, again, how groundwater works. Because when this work started, and in the last few years, I've heard a lot of misinformation or just confusion about exactly how the system works. What the model doesn't do, first of all, it doesn't create any more water for anybody. And I hope you're not disappointed. It doesn't make decisions. It's a decision support tool. People make decisions, not models. So we're not making decisions for anybody here. We can only test different what would be the outcomes of different scenarios that might be done. It doesn't solve everybody's problem. Again, it's a tool along the way for supporting planning and decision making. Just want to start out just a little background principle. Understand, many of you I'm sure understand this already, but what's the water cycle? Where does water come from? It all starts with precipitation, rain and snow on the landscape. A lot of that water runs off. Some of it soaks in to become groundwater, and then it moves through an aquifer, a geologic unit that can contain and transmit water. Some of that water, if there's no well picking it up, it's going to move through a groundwater flow system and discharge into a river or a lake or a wetland, and that's the natural cycle. From there it goes, evapotranspires and back into the atmosphere, and we start the circle again. If we put in wells, the wells withdraw some of that water, and that water goes somewhere too. It's used for irrigation, it's used for watering stock, it's used for people, used for industry. But it's all, we have a sort of a self-contained system here. Now, there's a couple of misconceptions, and this is a really important point. You know, one of my predecessors, a former state geologist, gave a talk about 20 or 30 years ago in this area saying there was almost limitless water in the central sands because we have such a great aquifer here. And we do. It's a wonderful aquifer. So if you conceptualize it this way, we have a water table here and a thickness of maybe 100 feet of aquifer that's full of water. And all this water, and people said, well, that's a lot of water. What's the problem? Well, the problem is illustrated here. This is the thickness we have, but if we move ahead, here is the height of the water table above the bottom of this stream. And what this means is only the top few feet of the water table are really what's feeding that stream. If we drop the water table just a few feet here so that this is below the stream, then the stream becomes dry or the flow is significantly diminished. So really, even though we have a great aquifer, and most wells are not going to go dry, and there's going to be actually very little drawdown or change in water levels in those wells, just changing the water table up here a little bit can start affecting the stream. And that's why we see this happening in central Wisconsin, because our landscape is so flat and we don't have a lot of topography on the landscape. So, what's our model? What does our model cover? We're covering the Little Plover River. So here's the central sands. Here's the Little Plover River watershed here, just east of Plover, east of Stevens Point, where we are today. This brown line is the surface watershed of the Little Plover, or I'll call that the Little Plover watershed. This is our model domain. Our model domain, that is the area that we actually simulated with our model, goes out to farther boundaries. It goes over here to the Tomorrow River, goes over to the Big Plover and the Wisconsin River, and it goes a few miles to the south. And we do that because when you're making a groundwater model, you want to have the boundaries be far enough away from your area of most interest that things going on in the boundaries don't affect that, don't affect your results very much. You also see a lot of dots here. Those are all the high-capacity wells. Most of them are irrigation wells, but not all. Some are municipal wells for the village of Plover. Some are industrial wells. They're all the high-capacity wells in the area are being simulated individually, though. How much water is used and when is it used? Well, most of the water in our model domain goes to irrigation, but it's not used throughout the year evenly. So this is a chart of month of the year versus total pumping in millions of gallons per day. And you can see that through the spring and the fall, the water use is pretty low. It's between 5 and 10 million gallons a day. When irrigation picks up, we go over to 120 million gallons a day. This is for all the wells together, and then that drops off again. There's some other uses for municipal wells that are pretty steady throughout the year, and there are some industrial uses and some ag non-irrigation, but most of the water is used for irrigation. It's important to note that though this is not happening all the time. It's not happening today. It happens during the growing season. I wanted to throw out a couple of terms so you know what I'm talking about, because I'm going to lapse into this and say these words occasionally. You might hear me say the word MODFlow. MODFlow is an acronym for the Modular Groundwater Flow Model, which is the modeling code or piece of software we use here. That's a very, very well documented, very widely used modeling code. It's probably the most common groundwater modeling code used in the world. You'll also hear me talk about SWB, or the soil water balance model. That's also a modeling code that we use. That was used to calculate the amount of recharge going into the groundwater model. Both of these things have been well documented, having peer-reviewed publications about them and so forth. So, if you hear me say those terms, that's what I'm talking about. Now, one of the challenges in this work was what I call closing the water balance, figuring out, understanding that not only are we worried about what's coming out of wells, but we're wondering where the water goes. Some of it evaporates, some of it runs off, some of it goes back into the ground through irrigation. And so we wanted to capture all that in this model. And this leads to some complications, because we have to start worrying about what crop type is grown on an individual field, what kind of soils there are under an individual field, what the irrigation rates that individual growers might be using. And we have to estimate that. We use this soil water balance, or SWB model, to do that. And we're trying to use and mimic the same techniques that the growers commonly use for irrigation scheduling. This is how they figure out how much and when to water the crops. Because that's not a simple thing to know. And growers may have different approaches to that, but there are some standard ways that most growers are using. We're trying to copy that technique here so that we're kind of in sync with what the growers are actually doing. So to summarize what we did, we really are using two models here. We use this ModFlow as the groundwater model to look at the groundwater part of the system, and we use this SWB, or soil water balance, to look at the non-groundwater, or the land surface part of the system. And the reason we do that is we need to get this recharge term. It comes from this soil water balance model. We need to put it into the groundwater model. That's a pretty important term. And these inputs there are many things that we had to measure about the landscape: climate, irrigation, land use and cover, topography and soils for the surface water part of this. And then for the groundwater part, we have to, of course, know recharge. We have to know a lot of properties about the geology of the rocks and the aquifer there, hydraulic conductivity, the characteristics of the stream, and so forth. So there's a lot of information that goes into the model. What do we get out the bottom? We only get two things. We get water levels, and we get flows. How much water flows to a stream or a lake, and what are the levels of that water? Those are really the only two things we get out of there. We also can get flow direction, so maybe three things. But that's what we draw conclusions from. So when we start working on this, we had to know where the irrigation was happening. So this is a map in our model basin. Remember, the Little Plover itself is somewhere in here. Where are the irrigated fields? So we have all that information, and there's a lot that's going into this, and I'm not going to talk about all the background there, but we can calculate how much irrigation is applied to each different crop. Different for potatoes than for corn, than for beans, and so forth. So all that's taken into account, as well as the different soil types beneath each field, and if possible, even the different irrigation rates that are used. So we've tried to count for all that in the model. We do this on a monthly or daily time step, and so we can calculate how recharge varies through the year. Rather than using one value for a whole year, we calculate how it changes month to month. So for example, there's very little recharge in January, February, when the ground is mostly frozen. There's a lot more in March and April when things are melting and we're getting a lot of rain, as we have been, at least in Madison recently. During the summer, there's not much recharge, except under some of the irrigation pivots. There is some recharge there from the irrigated water. And in the fall, we get another recharge pulse. So it varies through the year, and we're accounting for that. Conceptual model. Conceptual model is the hydrogeologist's way of kind of illustrating what's going into the groundwater model. So this is just imagine this is just a slice of the world here. The Little Plover is a little ditch right there that you can't see too well. But these are some of the features that our model, our computer model, has. We have the different geologic layers. The bottom of our system is crystalline rock, or basically granite that doesn't have much water in it. Above that, we have mostly sand and gravel, but in some places we have sandstone. We account for that. We have boundaries like the Wisconsin River and the Tomorrow River here. We are accounting for evapotranspiration and recharge that varies over the landscape. And we have our wells in there. And we can calculate with the model the groundwater flow directions. Now this is not to scale. This makes the aquifer look pretty thick, but when we really look at it to scale, it's really quite thin. So these are a couple of sections, cross sections through our model. Again, this would be the Little Plover River about in here. And the model is, the way the models work, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, is that we divided the world up into a mathematical grid of layers and grids. And so what you see here are some of the grid cells. Our grid cells are like pixels in your digital camera. Ours are 100 feet on a side, which is very, very small for groundwater modeling. But you think of that, that's our resolution. Those are the kind of the pixels of our model, our grid cells, 100 feet on a side. These three sections are at 1 to 15 vertical exaggeration, meaning the vertical height of the diagram is 15 times more than it really should be if we plotted it to scale. So this bottom one, this little thin pancake of a thing, is what the aquifer really looks like at scale. You know, it's 100 feet thick and miles wide, so it's just a skin. And that's important to realize that, we're dealing with a very thin aquifer here. And so that's why some of these effects of pumping show up. So when we calibrate, we build our flow model and we calibrate it. Calibration means we look at real-world data, a lot of which we got from some of the growers who have collected it. We got it from monitoring wells that are available around the area, some run by the USGS, some run by our survey. We installed some of our own wells to get this data. There were some put in by the agriculture department at UW in partnership with the potato growers. So there was quite a lot of data. We also used stream flow data that was collected, some by the USGS, some by the Village of Plover. We used also wells from the Del Monte Company and some from the Village of Plover. So we had quite a lot of data points. And we run the model and we see how our results fit with those data points. And we keep altering or tweaking parameters in the model until we get a good fit. And that's called calibration. And this model calibrates quite well. And when we're done, again, what do we get? We get, this is a map, again, of that basin. These contours represent the elevation of the water table. And so we get contours and we can calculate flow to the river, groundwater flow to the river. And this is done with all these wells pumping and accounting for irrigation and recharge of that irrigation. But you guys are more interested in using the model. So let me talk about a little bit what we can do with the model, with this tool that we have. The tool can be used to test different things, see what happens when we alter the system by changing recharge, changing where wells are, and that sort of thing. So I want to show you two examples. First, simulating a single new well. This might be the kind of thing that DNR wants to do if a high-capacity well application comes in. So this is, and I want to say this is not a real well. I didn't want to mislead people by saying we're really going to drill a well somewhere. This is a made-up well, made up by me, put in a place where there's no well now. But let's add a single well. How would one well affect the river? So here's the river. It's green on this diagram. And about 1.5 miles north, I'm going to drill a well, a typical irrigation well. And in fact, it's very typical because I just took all its parameters from an existing well somewhere else, so I know it's real. And I'm going to simulate this in two ways. First, a steady state simulation, which means we hold the model constant. We put one pumping rate in, one recharge rate in, and we assume that everything stays constant. That's a simpler way to do it and the way it's usually done. And that gives us one answer. But I'm also going to do a transient simulation where we let that recharge vary by month. We let that pumping rate not be zero in the spring and then go way up in the summer. And so we try to get things more exact and just to see what difference that would make. So let's look at how that works. So here's the hypothetical well about 1.5 miles north of the river. If we pump it under steady state situations, it's going to have some drawdown, meaning that it's going to lower the water table somewhat around the well, and that gives us these circular rings that's called the cone of depression. And that happens to be something like 10 feet right at the well, and this is about half a foot, about half a mile away, okay? The river is 1.5 miles away, so we're not even really going to see much drawdown over here. And you can't see it, but there is both steady state and transient lines there, and they're really not that different. After a year of pumping versus after a couple of months in the summer, the drawdown for that well is about the same. But let's look at what the effects on the river are. So what I'm going to do is now, here's a diagram of the river, and there are several gauges along the river. There's one at Kennedy Avenue, there's one at Eisenhower Avenue, this is Highway 51, here's Hoover Avenue, there's another one here down here at Oakray Avenue. I'm only going to focus on 3 through the rest of this talk: Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Hoover. These are the places with the longest flow measurements. So we have data from all these places. And by the way, when we run the model, the stream can be color-coded by the amount of discharge happening at each place along the river, so we can understand where the groundwater is coming in. So let's look at what's happening at those gauges. So if we pump the water here, what happens at the river? Well, we can see using the model, and what the model is good for is looking at changes in things. So we're looking at before the well was there and after the well was there, how have things changed? And we find that pumping that one well would change the flow at these gauges between 0.1 and 0.15 cubic feet per second, which isn't very much, but it's a little bit, and it's only one well. It's interesting, though, we can calculate that the pumping of this well, over 50% of the water pumped out of that well is water that would have eventually gone to the river. So the river is taking water, or the well is taking water that would have eventually gone to the river, and so the river flow has to be a little bit less. And the problem comes when you start adding all these wells together. But let's look at the transient response, and I think this is really interesting and probably something that you may not have thought about before. How does that transient or time critical pumping work? So here I have a 5-year model run. So these on this diagram represent years: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm only pumping the well for 1 summer. So that's what this diagram is. The well is pumping only during the middle of year 1. Now concentrate first on this blue line. This is the drawdown, or the change in water level if you measured that well. So you can see that there was no change, and then the well went on and the water level dropped, right? And that's what you would expect, dropped about 12 feet, according to our model. When the well was turned off, the water level came back. And it came back, and in a few weeks or months later, it's almost exactly like it was when it started. And this is consistent with what the growers have told us. They say, we measure our well in the spring, we measure it in the fall, and the water level is the same. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the stream flow has also decreased. So these 3 plots up here represent the flow at the Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Hoover gauges. This is the change in flow related to this particular situation, this well going on and off. So there's no change, and then the well goes on, and the flow goes down. So what I'm doing here is a comparison of the situation to where there is no well to where there is a well. I've already accounted for changes in recharge by month and changes in all the other wells. That's already been taken out of this. So we're only looking at the effects of one well here. And what's really interesting is the biggest change doesn't happen during the pumping season. It happens after the pumping season, and then it takes nearly 2 years to recover. And that's because of a hydrogeologic property called aquifer diffusivity, which you can think of as a memory that the aquifer has for things that happened in the past. It takes that long for the pressure wave and the change in storage to work its way over to the river. It's proportional to the distance from the river. But the point is that this pumping at this time has effects long after the pumping stops and long after you see it at the water level in the well. And let's carry that forward. Suppose we do that for several years. Suppose this well pumps every summer, only in the summer. So now we're pumping it every year for 5 years. And so every time we turn that well on, the water level in the well drops, we turn it off, it recovers. And again, it comes back to almost exactly where it started. So if you're just measuring that well, you're not going to see much of a change. But the river never gets back to where it started. In fact, it trends downward continually because each of these pumpings adds a little bit more to what happened the year before. So the biggest change is farthest downstream here at Hoover. The smallest change is up here at Kennedy at the gauge. But the important thing here that as pumping is repeated year after year, the river never fully recovers. Eventually, if you turn the well off, it would eventually recover, but it would take a few years. So this transient response is something I think that might be new to many of you, something that we can look at with this model. And it's something that's important when you start thinking about how all these wells interact. It's not a steady state situation. There's transients that's going forward. So another question a lot of people had is, what is the cumulative impact of pumping on the Little Plover River? Many of you have asked that question. I got to tell you, that's not a simple question to answer, because compared to what? What are you comparing this to? What time, what land use, how many wells, what kind of crops, what irrigation practices? When did all this happen? So and what was the weather like? Has there been climate change? So that's not a simple question to answer. But I'm going to try to give you an estimate of one answer that we can have for that. So here is the present day simulated water table. I showed you this map already of the Little Plover. Again, we have a lot of wells. We have water table contours. So these represent the elevation of the contour. I'm going to call this for the moment a baseline run. So this is our situation. And suppose now that we looked at where did that water come from. One thing we can do with the model is calculate where the groundwater originated that flowed to the river, and that's called the capture zone or the contributing area. So this is where groundwater comes from that discharges to the river. And so this is the area that if we put particles of water on the landscape, when we run them through the model, they actually end up going to the river. It's interesting that this area doesn't match the surface water basin. This is more like the groundwater basin. You can also see that it's really jaggedy, and that's because these wells that are in the way, inside of it, capture some of that water and keep it from going to the river, just as like that one well I just showed you. And so but the size of this capture is really, the recharge that falls on this size ends up in the river, and so the size of this area is proportional to the flow in the river. So if that's changed, we know the flow has to change. So that's the present day, but we can go back in time if we do this sort of scenario. Let's remove all the wells and change the recharge to non-irrigated ag use. So I make two changes in the model. I'm going to turn all the wells off. Now I know this isn't realistic. This is kind of a thought experiment, but it's something we can do. We're going to remove all the wells, and we're going to pretend the land was in a non-irrigated state. So this is going to give us an approximation of the pre-pumping condition. And when we do that, here is the water table we get. It looks kind of the same. Water's still flowing from the northeast, and it's flowing toward the river. What does the capture zone look like? Oh, before I get to that, how much of a change has there been? If I compare that map to the one previous, this is a map of change, or the difference in the water table between now and what I'm calling that pre-pumping scenario. And you can see these are contour lines of, this is 2 feet, 4 feet, and 6 feet. And what we conclude here is that the change is between 2 and 6 feet. The implication here is that under this scenario, pumping has reduced water table levels by 2 to 6 feet. Not very much, okay? Not very much. But remember that diagram I showed you that a little bit matters. So even though it's not very much, that little bit matters. And when we look at the capture zone, or the contributing area now, with the wells turned off, it's much larger. And it's significantly larger, and we compare the two, it looks like that. So we can see this is pre-pumping, this would be the capture zone now. It's smaller, and because of that, we have to have less water in the river. How much less? We can calculate that now too. So if, under this scenario, and I remember I'm going to again say this is only one of a number of scenarios you could think of, because again we don't know, this is kind of almost the worst case scenario. But what would the percent change here? Well, we find that we've lost about a 0.6 cubic feet per second at Eisenhower, about 3.3 at Eisenhower, and about 4.4 at Hoover. And so 0.6 to 4.4 would be the lowering of the river in an average year. Remember, years change. 2013 is what we're using for a baseline, which is about an average year, but some years are wetter, some years are drier. You're going to get different results if you use a different year. But this is the kind of thing we can test with the model. And it would be possible, certainly, to link different years together. How did it change during the year? So what I just gave you there was the steady state approach. If we looked at it in a transient approach through 1 year, happens to be 2013, the red line is the simulated baseline or the condition now. The dotted line is the condition with no wells, and the shading, which you can't really see, would be the public rights flows. And so you can see that this simulation made very little difference in the spring or the fall or the winter. During the summer, it does matter. When again we would get several more cubic feet per second at these gauges during the growing season with that scenario. So the key findings for this part of my talk is, first of all, the river is closely connected to the groundwater system, and it is vulnerable to impacts from nearby pumping. That's really probably not a surprise to anybody. We know that irrigation accounts for about 80% of the total water use in the basin, and it primarily happens during the summer. It doesn't happen all year. We know that land use and crop patterns affect recharge rates, and we can quantify that now. We have a tool to do that. And those in turn, when put into the model, we can see how those affect stream flows. We know that the river base flow is proportional to the size of the capture zone, and we know the contributing area, and we know that that's smaller than it used to be. So therefore, flow in the river has to be smaller than it used to be. An important point is that this delay idea, there can be a delay of weeks to months between changes in pumping and changes in the river because of this kind of memory effect that the groundwater system has, and it just depends largely on the size of the well, of course, and the geology at the site, but also on the distance between the well and the river. Where are we with the report? As Dan said, we've written a report. It's been through peer review now. That's a very important thing for us at the Geological and Natural History Survey and at the USGS. We have a pretty rigorous peer review requirement. It's back from peer review. We have many pages of comments from the peer reviewers who are people not affiliated with this project in any way and have no vested interest. We're making changes now. We are doing that revision. We're going to hopefully in a month or so be able to release the model to the public with a user guide. At that point, we'll have a technical workshop or some kind of webinar on model use, and then eventually, hopefully later this year, we'll have a nice final report for everybody. Now, and then a couple of questions about the larger central sands. I remember one of the goals of this study was to develop a protocol for doing this kind of thing, because the Little Plover is only one part of a bigger system. And I know many people are interested in other parts of the central sands. We believe the techniques we've used here, and we've talked a lot to the DNR about this, are appropriate for moving to a larger area if there was willingness and funding available to do that. We think that research on recharge is pretty important, and that should be continued. Also, to do models like this, you really need good field data, measurements of groundwater levels and discharge in streams. That's another important thing that we need to continue. And we need some more geologic work, particularly in western Washara County. And our geologists at the survey are hoping to be able to develop some new maps of that area in the next couple of years. But surprisingly, that's one of the few areas of the state that doesn't have modern glacial maps. So right now, what I'm going to do is change with Mike Fienen here, who is going to talk about the optimization and depletion potential part of this work.
All right, great. Thanks, Ken. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, great. Okay. So again, my name is Mike Fienen. I'm a hydrologist at the U.S. Geological Survey. We try to keep it confusing by having 2 geological surveys in the state. We're part of the Department of the Interior of the federal government. So I'm going to talk about an optimization or kind of a scenario testing tool that we developed to go with the model that Ken has just outlined. And then a concept called depletion potential, which I'll explain in a second. But first, I want to return to this slide that Ken was showing before to highlight this kind of thin part of the aquifer that's really connected with the surface water. And we talked about the fact that wells interact with that. Well, they can interact with that in several different ways. So let's zoom in a little bit and imagine we're just looking at that thin top part here. And these arrows are indicating the way that the groundwater would be flowing. So it enters the top of the land as recharge and moves toward streams and lakes. And in this part of the country, that's basically the main way that groundwater flows. And if we put in a well, there are three things that can happen. The water that supplies the well obviously comes from the groundwater system. And one thing is called interception. So there, you can see these arrows of water that are going along, and if they encounter a well, some of that water is going to go into the well instead of going into the stream. There's another concept called diversion, which is similar. This is water that was maybe not encountered directly by the well. It may be on the other side of the well, between the two, and either can go to this well or, and it's hard to show in a cross-section like this, but the presence of wells changes the overall flow pattern, and it may divert water that was going to the stream to another stream or to a different well. And finally, if the well is close enough and the pumping rate is high enough, it can actually reverse. Instead of having flow going into the stream, it may actually pull water out of the stream. And these three things we call depletion. So it's just the concept of how much water is the decrease in flow due to pumping. So this is very similar to an image that Ken showed before. Sorry, it's a little grainy. But this is showing the capture zone of the Little Plover River. Here's the river with the 4 gauges that were talked about before, and showing the path of water that enters the river. And as Ken showed before, if we include pumping, you get this jagged appearance because some of that water is not making it all the way to the river. But importantly, it's not all being intercepted by wells. Some of it is these other concepts of diversion, and maybe even a little bit of induced infiltration. We can flip this around if we want and look at the capture zone of wells. So this is the same kind of pattern, but this is showing where the water flows, not if it ends up in the river, but if it ends up in a well. And the pink colors here are showing where in that area, all of the water that went through that part of the model ended up in a well. And the green is showing that some of it went to the well and some of it went somewhere else. And if we overlay the capture area of the river with the capture area of the wells, at every place here, this adds up to 100%. So the water's either going to the river or it's going to one of the wells. So despite the fact that I just mentioned we have these 3 different kinds of depletion, in the end, it doesn't really matter which one is happening. What we know from the model, we can parse that out if we need to. But a lot of the time, it's enough to say, if we put in a well, what does that do to the stream? What change, if any, is there to the stream? And there's a concept that we can use for that called depletion potential. I promise this is the only equation I'll trouble you with today. But it might show up twice. And all we're showing here is Q is what hydrologists like to use to mean flow. So this is a ratio of flow in a stream to flow in a well. And in words, this really means it's the reduction in flow at a stream due to some new pumping in a well. And this is one of the great uses of a model, because the model, as Ken showed, is a description of this system. It matches the exact conditions on the ground as best we can. So we can run the model with the existing pumping, and then we can simulate a new well, just one new well, and look at what difference do we get in the stream flow with the model run with the well and without the well. And we can do that all over the place to see which wells are having a bigger impact on the stream than others. Oh, there it is again, sorry. Since this is just a ratio, so it's a value between 0 and 1, if the value was 0, that means no matter what the pumping rate in that well was, there's no change in the stream. If the value is 1, that means for every gallon per minute that you pump out of the well, there's a gallon per minute decrease in the stream flow. And usually we don't get 1 or 0, usually it's something in between. So like I said, and we're lucky that we have some great computing resources, so we can run the model hundreds or thousands of times without much difficulty. So what we did was, for all of the wells in the area, and I apologize, for some reason this is a little dark, but I promise this is the Little Plover River here. And there's the Kennedy gauge here, Eisenhower, Interstate 39, and Hoover. So we're going from upstream to downstream. And what these circles are showing is the location of wells and their depletion potential, so that ratio value. And both the size of the circle and the color indicate whether it's a value between 0 and 1. And the dark pink would be 1. None of these have a value of 1. They have a value somewhere between about 0.3 to 0.6 or so. And as we step downstream, that, like Ken was showing, the capture area is even bigger, so actually what the depletion potential increases relative to gauges further downstream. So if we look at Hoover, this is kind of the picture we get. One great thing about this is this was done with the model, just completely objectively. I just put in a well, run the model, and calculated the difference. You know, hydrogeology students learn exactly this concept, and one of the things that they learn is that proximity to a river is really important. So if a well is really close to a river, it's going to get more of its water at expense of the river. If it's really far away, it's getting its water from somewhere else. So sure enough, we see that. We see a pink pattern close to the river, and it drops off as we get farther away. One important issue, though, in this part of the country is it's still getting its water from a river. It's just not getting its water from the river that we're measuring right now. So for the rest of this analysis, we're going to focus in on the areas that have a depletion potential greater than a quarter, greater than 0.25. So what that means is at least that basically 25% of the water entering the well would have otherwise gone to the Little Plover River. If it's smaller than that, that doesn't mean it's not coming from a river. It just means it's coming from a different river. And right now, we were focused on the Little Plover for this study. If we superimpose that capture map that we showed before, so now this is showing the actual direction of flow through the aquifer, and you can see that the colors line up not too bad. They're kind of close. But if that capture map was if there was no pumping in the system. But if we look at what the actual capture map for the river is now, it's not really symmetrical. The water is actually coming from the north. So more water that enters the river comes from the north than it does from the south. But the depletion potential is pretty symmetrical around the river. It's driven, like I said, mostly by distance from the river. It doesn't really matter which direction it's coming from. And that's important because if you're trying to determine which wells are most connected with the river, if you just looked at the flow map and looked at coming from the north, you'd miss that the area to the south is impactful too. So I would argue that rather than using flow direction only, depletion potential is a really valuable tool for trying to understand which wells have an impact and which wells don't. But to calculate depletion potential, you need a model. So this was an outcome of the fact that we have a model for this part of the state. Yeah, so one of the main things that you can use this for is if you want to, and there has been some work toward this, and there will be more work in the future, looking at specific scenarios about how maybe flow could be increased in the Little Plover River. You want to focus in on wells that are close by and have a high depletion potential, rather than wells that are really far away, if you're after increasing flow in one certain area. That's an important outcome of this work. So one way to do that is just to create scenarios, and there are a lot of different reasons. You know, there are different owners and different uses of the river, and you know, I don't live in this area, and you know, we're being completely objective and just looking. I'm only looking at the way the water system works. There are many bigger, very important issues in society that determine which wells would actually change, and we're just providing a tool. So I just want to point that out here. With that in mind, one thing we can do is look at what would happen if the only criterion we used for decreasing flow in a well was its depletion potential. What if we started to just turn some of those wells off? And again, I'm not proposing this is a specific solution. This is just an illustration. And what you see here is 4 plots. This is the 4 gauges that we've talked about, and a little hard to read. This is Kennedy, Eisenhower, I-39, and Hoover. And this curve here is showing the increase in flow if you take a well out of production. And this is kind of a little video. So what you're going to see, there's black dots that are going to show up on this graph, and this graph is showing the depletion potential values. So as you move along and start to remove wells, the flow increases in the river. The horizontal dotted lines here are the public rights flow. So you can get an idea of how many wells you might have to decrease pumping in order to restore flow above the public rights flow. But probably, and you can see the black dots, this is showing different places where wells could be turned off. But what's really important is we're still adding tons of dots here, and the slope is really flattening out. Now that we're far away from the river, we're not really improving things much by removing, or turning off more wells. You really want to focus in on areas that are likely to have the impact, and this is something the model can tell us. I'm actually going to skip this one. It's showing basically the same thing, but we're running a little short on time. Okay, so this is the concept of depletion potential, an outcome of the model, and that's one thing that we can use depletion potential for. Another thing, and a tool that the DNR was asking us specifically to evaluate, is something called constrained optimization. And really, I promise I won't show you the equations for this, but there are lots and they're awesome. But what can we do to, if we know that the flow is below the public rights level, and we want to increase the public rights level? I showed one example of turning off wells, but the other idea would be, well, what if we want to balance the change in pumping with the change in the flow so that it's optimal? And by optimal, I mean we want to reduce pumping the least possible and still increase the flow to where we want it to be. You don't want to just take a shotgun approach and start telling people to pump less, but actually try to find an optimal balance here. And there's great tools to do this. So, and one of them is called the groundwater management package for the model that we used. So we evaluated that, and again, we're focusing in on the wells. So here's the Little Plover River again, and these are all the wells in the region that have a depletion potential greater than 0.25. So we want to look at those by themselves. And then we can actually make groups of wells. It's mathematically kind of difficult if you look at each well individually, so it makes sense to make groups. And again, I'm a scientist that doesn't know anything about how the world works here, besides the groundwater. So what I know is the groundwater. And so to me, these groups are based on similar location, so that they're proximal to each other, and similar depletion potential. Obviously, to do this in future scenarios, you would want to consider things like, who owns the land and different water uses and stuff like that. This was just yet another illustration. And so there are a couple things that we can do to evaluate the minimum reduction in pumping to get the flow rate that we want. One is to change how many clusters are in that group. So are we looking at groups of 2 wells or groups of 10 wells? And the other is how much reduction is allowed for each group. And I'll show what this means in a second. But the first thing I did was said, well, what if everybody was subject to the same % reduction in flow, in pumping? So if there was just one amount that that every well in that area would have to use. We can do that, but that requires quite a bit of reduction in pumping. That would be 30%. But remember, the wells that are far away have less impact than the wells that are close by. So you would have to be reducing even far away wells at a similar rate as the ones that are close by. That's not really very efficient if you think of the whole thing as a system and how much water is needed for the various uses. So the other thing we could do is use the clusters that I showed before, and we can put a cap. We can put a limit on how much each of those can be reduced. If it's 35%, we get the plot on the left. And this is, again, this is a little hard to see, I apologize. But basically the size and the colors on the same scale as before. So pink would be high and green is low. You would have to spread that reduction around quite a bit. But if you were allowing certain clusters to reduce 100%, so you're basically turning some off and leaving the others alone, it would be a lot fewer wells that would be impacted. And it's a little bit more efficient in the overall system sense. So if you reduce by 35% the most, then the total reduction over the whole basin would be 26%. If you allow some wells to be completely turned off, then you only have to reduce pumping overall in the basin by 20%. So now, of course, this opens a huge amount of social considerations and questions of livelihood and questions of water use, which that's where my job ends and other people's job begins. Lucky me. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Ken for a wrap-up here, and then I guess we will be available for questions.
So yeah, we got our slides a little backwards there, but that's our presentation. And I guess if there's one conclusion, is that we've created a tool here that's available for people to use to make decisions. And our conclusion is that and I think the DNR shares this from our conversation with them, is that it's an appropriate thing that could be expanded to larger parts of the Central Sands, maybe all the Central Sands, maybe even other parts of Wisconsin. In other words, we know the techniques here. So I think if people are looking for one big conclusion, that is that we've developed a tool that is going to be useful to make decisions. So I'm going to introduce John Exo, and who's with UW Extension, and he's going to moderate the rest of the evening. So, John.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks, Ken. So, as has been alluded, you have questions, and probably a lot of questions. And so, let me just introduce myself and provide a little preamble. Again, my name is John Exo, and I'm a natural resources educator with UW Extension. And I'm part of the Environmental Resources Center. And it's kind of interesting that the Environmental Resources Center is an integrated center that integrates both agriculture and natural resources. So I guess it's not by accident that I'm here, just by virtue of my affiliation with that center. But I want to also say that I'm grateful to be here and maybe humbled and gratified, because as a graduate of University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point almost 30 years ago, I'm feeling like this is, in a way, coming home for me to be part of this great institution and the people that work here, and as well the people here in the community. Extension has taken its lumps in several budgets over recent years, but one thing I will say about the part of Extension that I work in is that we have tremendous capacity to do both research and outreach and education related to issues related to groundwater and natural resources. And I feel gratified that I'm a part of that. I get to work with people like Ken Williams and others at the local level, Ken Schrader here, the agriculture agent, Patrick Nearing, who's my co-moderator right here, who's the community resource development educator in Waushara County, and our colleagues, Nathan Sandwick, and our other colleagues in other counties around the state. In addition, we get to work with people like Ken Bradbury and Mike Fienen, who bring really the research knowledge to issues like this. And then, of course, our colleagues in the Department of Natural Resources, who have the job of managing, making tough decisions, and managing programs and other things that try and optimize our use of natural resources. So I feel really grateful to be part of this whole community of professionals and now a part of this issue. If you remember 2 years ago in January of 2014, I recognize a lot of faces here that were also at that meeting and at the Plover Center, at the Plover Community Center. And if I recall, it was about 20 below zero, and we packed about 300 people into that facility as well. So it's nice to kind of bring this whole opportunity for you, the public, full circle. And so we're anticipating that you have a lot of questions, and maybe we should start out with a few maybe ways to make this fair for everybody. I wouldn't call them ground rules per se, but maybe some of you would think of them that way. What was that? Groundwater rules. Okay. we have two people, Patrick Nearing and Mike Vandenhavel with Representative Shanklin's office with mics, and they are going to do their best to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask a question. Actually, we're all going to do our best. So why don't we do it this way? Please raise your hand. They will roam through the aisles, hand you the mic, and we'll all do our best to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to ask a question. Please try and keep them as focused as you can on the content of what you heard tonight and your questions that result from that content. I know you're going to have questions about managing groundwater and other things. You're also going to have questions about the model and the things that you've heard tonight. But try and keep your questions focused as much as possible so that as many people as possible can ask questions. And whether we get out of here at 8 o'clock or not doesn't really matter. We'll try and shoot for that, but we want to make sure that people have enough opportunity to ask questions. And if I sense that they start getting repetitive, then we'll probably bring things to a close. But why don't we just start with the first question, and either Mike or Patrick will hand you a mic. Let's bring up the panelists first. So in addition to Ken Bradbury and Mike Fienen, we have Larry Lynch, who's a hydrogeologist with the Wisconsin DNR. And next to him, Eric Ebersberger, who's the division administrator with the Division of Environmental Management, assistant division administrator with the Division of Environmental Management.
Deputy, close enough.
I didn't even look at my note. And Dan Halzel, who's a natural resources manager in the West Central District with Wisconsin DNR. So if you could just try and address your question to either one of the researchers, Ken or Mike, or to one of the representatives from DNR, maybe that would help too. How does that sound? Does that sound like it'll work for people? All right. Any other ground rules anyone would like to propose? All right, let's get going. You had your hand up first, sir. Yes. Yeah, maybe we can hear you.
This one's for Ken. Ken, thank you very much, and you and for all your work on developing a model. My question is, and this relates to the timeliness of making decisions that are really before us. It's part of that social thing that we couldn't really touch. But is it possible that the information that you glean from a model might be used in a shorter term than regenerating it for the entire Central Sands area to advise people about the impact of, let's say, a sudden change in land use, like cut down all the trees and put in high-cap wells? Is there any way to infer from what you've gathered in another zone that's outside of your study area? Is it at all possible that you could advise people in the short term about quantifying the effect of a sudden change in the way that we use the land?
Okay, well that's... So it's okay. Is that on? I paid for this microphone. Good question, and I understand the question. Well, keep in mind that the model we built is only for the place that it was built, and I think you understand that. Mm-hmm. We can test different scenarios like cutting down trees or putting in trees, or which all relates to changing land use. We can test that in this area and get an idea of at least the sensitivity to what might happen if we do certain things. And so I would say yes, to a limited extent to what you're asking, that it certainly can be used to inform decisions. As I said, though, the model itself is really we can only really claim it's accurate in this one area that it was built for, but for looking at concepts, certainly the concepts of particularly other parts of the Central Sands, the general hydrogeology is similar enough that I think we could draw some general conclusions, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Right here on the aisle.
Hi. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
Oh, good. So what I understand about the model is that it helps us when we're looking at the quantity of water And I'm wondering if there's going to be an option at some point for us to measure the quality. So if we're looking at a nutrient load or a temperature and how that is reflected by the amount of water in the stream. And so I'm wondering if that is going to be a possibility in the future.
So your question was about groundwater quality. And
Right.
That's a
If there's, if we're looking at the amount that's in there and the nutrient load, and if we are able to increase the amount of water, does that dilute the nutrient load? Or say we're looking at the water is 70 degrees and we'd like it to be 65. How do we change that, and how does that relate to the amount of water?
Well, that's a good question. This particular scope of our work did not involve groundwater quality or what we might call contaminant transport, but any time that you to do that sort of work, you have to have a groundwater quantity model like this one first. So we have a foundation for that. And that's something that certainly could be worked on if there was desire and of course funding available for doing that. So it's the foundation. It's not done yet. We can do some simple things like I mentioned. I showed those capture zones, and that's done with a technique called particle tracking. So we can tell the directions that a dissolved solute might flow and how fast and to which wells or which part of the river it might go to. You can do some simple mixing calculations. If you really want if you're really interested in temperature modeling or something like that, we have to get a little more sophisticated. So we have a foundation for doing that. It's something that would need to be built on, and we would need to have a project and some scope and funding to do that sort of thing.
Somebody over here on this side.
May as well be efficient and ask two questions. One for Ken. The impact on the public rights stage in your model ranges from 0.6 of a CFS to 4.4 of CFS. So I presume that's related to weather impacts, if that's what that is. So if you implemented your model, how would you account for reduction in pumping in years when you didn't have a high impact on the public rights stage? And the second question is related to that: how close is close? Some of these wells obviously are impacting more according to the model, others less. I couldn't tell from the map whether that's a few hundred yards or a few miles.
Okay, well, thanks for the question, Ron. I guess the second part first, how close is close? Well, I showed you an example where a well 1.5 miles away had an impact. So for that particular well, that might be considered close. That question is, and that's something Mike's approach could calculate. It's based on the distance and amount of discharge from the well. So those two things go together. So a big well far away could have the same impact as a little well closer. So that's how you answer that question. It depends on the construction of the well and how much it's pumping. Now, for the first part of your question, which is a very astute observation, is that the things are going to be different year by year, and I only showed you 1 year. And your question was, if I can paraphrase it, how would the public rights stage, how would the effects on the public relative to the public rights flows vary from year to year versus a wet versus a dry? We haven't answered that directly here, but that certainly could be done. A model is quite capable of simulating a wet year and a dry year and a series of those. That's all just work that people can do if you're interested in that. And we haven't, that's really beyond the scope of what we were asked to do here, but that's what the model can be used for. The public rights flow itself is when you get right down to it, it's a little bit hard to implement because you're looking at just points along a stream at a certain, at some kind of average, and of course the stream is never at an average. It's going up and down depending on the weather, the dry year, or the season, and so forth. So it's a little more complicated than that, but the model is quite capable of doing that if people want to answer those questions with it.
Over here, that's your hand up, sir.
Yes. You indicated the tool as finalized will be available to others.
Yes.
So 60 to my closest friends and I can walk in and say, I want to use the tool? That's question number one. And the other part is, what would I bring if I'm able to use the tool? Money and data?
That's a great question. Well, when we say that it's a publicly available tool, it's publicly available. But it's going to require somebody that knows about hydrogeology and groundwater modeling to really run it efficiently. There are people that can do that. So there are people at DNR that can do that. I know there are people in this room who I know can do that. There are consulting firms out there that can do that. I would not, this is not designed for the average citizen to be able to use. It's too bad. I mean, that's just the way it is. So your closest friends probably wouldn't want to get involved with this. It's not that much fun anyway. But I mean, it's a. But when I say that it's publicly available, that means that if the lake, I don't know who you're with the growers or the lake group or DNR or somebody else. There are professionals around that can do this sort of thing, or we can do it. USGS can do it. So there are people that can run that, but it's not intended for the average person to be able to run.
Do you have any money?
Yeah, bring both. Yeah, preferably money. It's I wish I could say that oh yeah, we can just do anything for anybody, but I have to pay a staff and we have to have funding. And so money is going to be required, whoever runs this, I think. Certainly for us to do for us, when I say us, our Geological Natural History Survey, for us to do a project, we need to be able to support our staff. So that involves money. So yeah, and data makes it a lot easier and more robust, sure.
For the gentleman from the DNR, when this tool is completed, up and running, will you be using that under current law and regulations to determine the cumulative impact on new well permits?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the objectives of the model from the DNR's perspective, was to develop a tool that we could use in evaluating high-capacity well applications. And the question of cumulative impacts, yes. Again, as Mike and Ken demonstrated, it's perfectly able to do that. We would intend to use the model on a case-by-case basis to evaluate a specific application. We're not intending to use it at least initially anyway, in a broad application to try to, from a regulatory perspective, change how high-capacity wells are used. It would be our intention to continue working with stakeholders on a voluntary and collaborative fashion to try to develop scenarios that would start to achieve a balance between groundwater use and flow in the stream. But to answer your question directly, yes, it is capable of doing that.
So, as a follow-up, for a particular well with a new permit, if it's determined that there is going to be an impact on a water body nearby, would you restrict that well? I mean, it's a yes or no question.
Well, it may be a yes or no question to you, but my answer is not going to be yes or no. I mean, we'll continue doing what we do now, and that's to evaluate any high-capacity well and other wells around it to determine whether or not it would have significant impact on any water of the state. If the answer to that question is yes, it would have significant impacts, then we would deny the application or work with the applicant to modify their application so that the impacts get to a point where they aren't significant. But there are situations where that's not possible, and in that case it would be denied.
Somebody in the middle had yes, sir.
Less than 35 miles to the southwest of us here lays a area in southern Saratoga in Wood County, in the township of Saratoga in southern Wood County. There's a proposed developer that's proposed a Golden Sands Dairy is the name of the developer, and he's proposed a 33 wells in an area approximately 34 square miles, and it encompasses 2 trout streams. And what I'm wondering is, these streams basically, from what I see tonight, mirror exactly the Little Plover River. And my question is any of the data that's been generated here tonight going to be used in that groundwater modeling as far as the DNR is concerned in issuing any permits?
It's me, huh? Well, I can honestly say I've not worked on that project, but I know a bit about it, and maybe Dan can add to what I'll say. We're currently evaluating the modeling work that was done for the applicant. We have conducted some of our own simulations, and again, we're finishing up our write-up to be incorporated into the environmental impact statement. In terms of incorporating what was done here, some of the concepts would be applied. Things like the soil-water balance and how you get it recharged and evapotranspiration. It also is a mod flow model. So there's not a real direct application of this model to that area, but they are similar in the sense of overall approach. And the predictions that would come out of that model would be similar to what Ken and Mike shared with you in terms of how would stream flow be affected at different points along the stream. So it will show depletion at one stream crossing and then carry down to the mouth with the Wisconsin River. So the approaches will be similar, but it's not a direct application of this model. Is that okay?
How about anybody over up on the high there, way in the back? Yeah.
Way up in the nosebleeds.
My question is, when you guys were mapping your high-capacity wells, did you take into account confined aquifers into this, or did those get ruled out because they weren't affecting the stream?
So his question was about confined aquifers. So for those of you who don't know, confined aquifer means an aquifer that has a less permeable geologic unit, like a clay layer or a silt layer on its top. And so that's called a confined situation. Typically in the central sands, that's not the situation. The water table is the upper surface or the top of the saturated zone. So in the Little Plover, and that's an important question. So it's a good question because groundwater behaves a little bit differently in confined versus unconfined situations. In the Little Plover area, we did think about that question, and we looked at well construction reports and well logs, and we actually did our own some coring of the sand to see if there was any of this confining unit, silt layers, or an aquitard as it's called there, and we did not find that. And we actually did not expect to find that either, but we wanted to be sure. So and the high capacity well list we got from DNR records, so we know where those are. So that was around in our model, the aquifer is unconfined, the sand is. If your question may, you may be thinking about farther south. When we get down to Washara County, there is a geologic unit called the New Rome Formation. That's a silty unit that's in the sand, and that can cause some confining conditions locally down there, but those are not present around here, around the Little Plover.
How about anybody over on this far side? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering when you did your studies, if you said you looked at cover the cover crop and things like that, did you make any recommendations or find anything where a certain cover crop required less irrigation that could possibly look at the area and say what is a profitable crop that may require less irrigation and make those recommendations, because that has, you know, for farm policy, a lot of things like that. So what really would be a more natural crop here that could be profitable, use less of our water, and that both farmers and recreational users and, you know, would benefit? Has there been any studies, or is that continuing?
Give this one the mic.
Yeah, so the way that we did the modeling right now was trying to reflect current existing conditions. So we did our best to represent exactly what crops are in place in the year that we simulated. But a future outcome is the ability to sort of make changes to that easier than we used to be able to. The soil water balance code that Ken talked about is pretty kind of complicated to set up. So to change a single area, to change what crop is in place can be a little bit of an involved process. But at the end of the project, we did develop a way that we can kind of switch them around a little bit faster. So so the ability is there to evaluate exactly the kind of things that you're suggesting, but we did not come up with a recommendation now. That's a potential future use of the model, though.
Your study was for 1 year, and from the model, you took the data that was given to you by the various owners of the wells. And then you showed us what the effect it would have on one well if you added a well. Did you do any studies to see what effect it would have had if all 2,800 wells were at capacity in the years that we have droughts?
We did not. So the question is, if, well, 2,800, we didn't have 2,800 in this model.
Okay.
There was, about 400 and some in this model. But the question is, if they're all at capacity, well, no, we didn't do that, but that would be an enormous amount of water, because first of all, most wells are, as I understand it, and the DNR can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're actually approved for more. They're approved at the maximum capacity that I think the owner could ever want. Usually, they're never used at that capacity. In my experience, it's always something less, and they're not used all the time. So, turning them all on at once is not a very realistic. Turning them all on at once for the whole year, for example, is not a very realistic scenario. We did not do that. If we did that, I think there would be some pretty big impacts which would probably not be very realistic, because I don't think they would ever happen. But it could be done. That's a simulation that could be done. We have not done that, though.
So the DNR then could use this model to not only determine what effect it would have in a certain location, but could issue a permit based on a certain volume they're allowed to use. And if we're approving capacities of much higher, theoretically, they all can be turned on. So why don't we reduce the amount of capacity for all the wells to begin with, to make sure that the rivers do not dry up?
Thanks. Okay, well, Eric keeps looking at me.
I haven't figured out he's the boss. So.
Eric's in charge. So if he tells me to answer, I'm going to answer, even if I don't want to. No. So yeah, I mean, high cap well approvals for many years were issued at basically full capacity. So somebody would say, I want a 1,000-gallon-a-minute irrigation well. We would approve it, and we would have a daily maximum of 1.4 million gallons a day that they could pump. Recently, with some of the court cases that have affected our reviews, we have been putting limits on how much people can use. And in cases where we identify that there could be an impact on the water of the state, that's one of the changes that we work with the applicant, is say, well, you know, we can only give you an inch a week or an inch and a half a week, if you apply more than that, you're going to have an impact. So we'll figure out then what 1.5 inches a week over their acreage is, and that would be their pumping limit. So we have many cases where we impose a monthly pumping limit that's well below their capacity. So that's one thing to answer your question. The other is our evaluation of water use data that we get. And we've gotten good data now since about 2011. People have started reporting pumpage in 2006. The first few years, we didn't have great compliance. We weren't real confident in the quality of the data. But since 2011, we have a high level of confidence in the data. And we've evaluated that information, and it also happens in that time that we've had some drought years, we've had some wet years. So we're seeing that we have a pretty good understanding of how the wells are used. And as Ken said, it would be very unlikely that anybody would ever operate, full out for the entire growing season, and that's borne out by the water use data and our evaluation of it. Wells are used, Bob can help me out here, but I think in the Central Sands, I think the average is like 37% of their capacity, or 50%? On the high. Yeah. So, and again, that's based on our evaluation of pumping data, looking at what they report compared to what their maximum capacity would be. So again, the simulation having everybody pump full out really isn't realistic. That's not how the wells are operated.
Continue across all the way up to the top by the camera there. You have a loud voice, sir?
Well, this area that you guys are alluding to here about 50 to 70 years ago was all prairie lands. How much is factored into the effect of like these pine trees and everything? How much do these trees draw out of the water in addition? Because really the areas start foresting in as the center pivot wells start coming in. The other question I have to ask too is if there is a high capacity well that draws about 13 million gallons a day as projected to, how far of an impact will that affect, like drawing a backdraw, like say from the Wisconsin River to the east of 5 miles?
Okay, well, the first part of the question, there's a lot of, there's a lot of, I've heard a lot of interest in trees and pine trees and how much water they use. And I'm no expert on that, and neither is Mike, I don't think. What we did is, for this particular model, there are not a lot of pine trees in the basin, and it was not a big factor for this particular model. I know that there's interest in that subject, and our model, if people want to come up with better, more data on pine trees, when I've looked at the literature, and I haven't looked at all of it by any means, there's quite a bit of variation in water use by pine trees depending on where they're planted, what kind of tree, what kind of soil, and all that sort of thing. So, but again, that's not my expertise. The other question about was how far would a well impact from the Wisconsin River? Well, that's going to have very little impact on the Wisconsin River because the Wisconsin River is a big river, and that's actually an important concept that
I was referring to the diversion effect.
I'm sorry. Maybe state your question again. I wasn't quite clear then.
A high-capacity well that draws about 13 million gallons a day is projected to. And it's like 5 miles east of the Wisconsin River. What kind of an impact will it have? Will it make the water actually run back towards that well, that cone?
Not enough. For 5 miles, no. You would not. Yeah, you would. No, that you wouldn't. Even a real big well 5 miles from the river in this terrain is not going to cause any backflow or induced infiltration, as it would be called, that far away. There certainly is. One of the messages here is that all water is coming from somewhere, though. I mean, you don't get something for nothing, and every time we fool around with Mother Nature, we change something. So if you're taking water out of a well, it's water that didn't go somewhere else, and that's what our model demonstrates. And so your well is going to impact the Wisconsin River a little bit. Now, the Wisconsin River is a big river, so it's going to be pretty imperceptible, but don't think that you ever get something for nothing, because we always have to maintain mass balance here, and we always have to account for all the water. But not much impact in your case.
How about the caucus in the middle?
Can you share with us what the funding sources were for this study? How much came from which sources? And then where did you present this data, this model, so far, and when? I'm just kind of looking at timelines and trying to understand where we are in the process today in relation to the peer review, because I always thought in science the peer review gets addressed first, and then we really go and and spend a lot more time sharing in various settings. So could you just clear all of those things up for us?
Well, the question about who funded it, the DNR funded this study. I can't remember what the amount was. $230,000. That was matched in part by the U.S. Geological Survey, and our survey, the Wisconsin survey and the extension, we contributed our time, no financial money there. The vegetable and potato growers donated some money that we used to buy some equipment that was used in this study. That was on the order of $10,000, I think. That's pretty much what we have for this study. There have been some other work going on that has sometimes gotten confused with this work. There's work going on down in Washara County that there's been some money from the potato and vegetable growers that have gone to our survey for other work around Long Lake and for some studies on recharge down there that were not directly related to this project. As far as peer review, we have been following, well, the other question was, where have we presented this information before? Mike and I have both given talks at a number of scientific venues. I've given talks at the Geological Society of America, at the American Water Resources Association meeting, which was about a month ago, early March. We've given talks to the Wisconsin Water Association. I've met with some of the environmental groups. We've been to the Little Plover committee that meets in Portage County. We feel like we've given a lot of talks about this stuff. So I'm sure there have been people that have gotten missed, but we've been, I think, pretty active in presenting talks about it. Yeah, Mike,
I'll just add, I think from your question, you were kind of asking how we were able to provide these preliminary results before the peer review. And yeah, and so in scientific conferences, this is pretty common practice. And there's basically a disclaimer, saying that this is preliminary, and it's a great way that we get feedback on our work. Also, public forums like this, we get feedback and we take it very seriously, and it often changes some of our future directions. So, but in terms of the peer review of the report, that's what's necessary before we can release something in writing that will be that people will be able to use, and we're working on that right now.
Just a comment to follow up. I'm just thinking if the vast majority of dollars, if I understood you correctly, were public dollars. I'm thinking where does the public, like many of us in this room, the public seems to be the last one spoken to. I realize that you have scientific organizations and so on for your feedback, and it's really neat to hear some of the circles that you have spoken to. But I think that, again, with the public dollar, you think that the public would have gotten something a little sooner than we hear it a little later, because this is really fascinating, and I know there's a lot of stakeholdership in this room from every sector, and really truly when we are very much needing solutions, any delay in getting any of this information out to the public is a delay in achieving those balanced solutions.
Well, just a quick follow-up to that. I see your point now, and part of why there's a big public forum like this is that we want to be as close as we are to a final answer. So at the scientific conferences, things are preliminary, and sometimes we change, based on what our colleagues tell us. But we don't want to put out things that are too preliminary that might give the wrong idea of what we're doing. We really want to be sure that we're on track before you all, the public that have funded the work, get engaged in it. So.
Okay, let's go all the way over to this side again. How about way in the back there, sir? Almost in the back. Green rollers from the back. There you go.
I have a recharge question for you instead of withdrawal. How much do you figure out as far as urban sprawl has to do with like the Little Plover Basin in your model, as far as new streets, new subdivision, parking lots, and the drainage for them going off elsewhere instead of being recharged into the aquifer?
So the question was about the effect of urbanization. We did, I don't have a number in front of me, but we did consider that because we looked at land use throughout the model domain, and that includes both ag and urbanized land. Our soil water balance model takes that into account, and if there are certain areas where you don't get any recharge, and that is indeed routed away. So we accounted for that. I don't have, you asked for a number, I don't have the percentage in my head right now. I think it's in our report. But we have thought about that.
Okay. Going to come back over to this side and then swing across again. Yes?
My question is, I know this probably wasn't covered in the study, but hopefully one of you can answer this question. Are there things that we can do that would increase the recharge rate of the groundwater?
Questions about increasing the recharge rate. Well, obviously, of course, this is an area with state that's very sandy, and so recharge happens better here than a lot of places. There's probably, of course, not paving things over is a good way to do it. It's a good way to maintain recharge, and certainly how subdivisions are designed and how stormwater is routed are all positive things. So those are mainly engineering solutions, I would say, like that. But we haven't really investigated particular solutions for that here. That's probably an interesting field of study, though. Not something that we really were charged with doing.
Coming across the middle, sir, you've had your hand up several times.
Thanks. Two questions. First of all, for Ken and Mike, 424 wells, I think, were used in the model for data as well as calibration. Was that a mix use? Was there agricultural as well as industrial and municipal wells used for that? That's question number one. And the other question, just following up on these questions on recharge, I was wondering if you could briefly summarize the pre-settlement approach or pre-pumping approach that you undertook for looking at recharge as well as base flow for the Little Plover River, and more importantly, your confidence in that approach, in the confidence in the recharge and the base flow.
Okay, well, I'll answer the first part. Mike can answer the second part. You asked Jim about, I think you're talking about how many wells used for calibration rather than for pumping. Is that right? There was the mix of water uses. Well, we used every high-capacity well. Every high-capacity well in the model domain is simulated. Most of those are ag wells, but not all. There are some, as I showed a graph, there are some municipal wells. That's a pretty small percentage in number, but it's a pretty high water use in volume because the municipal wells pump all the time, every month, every day in some of the cases, where the irrigation wells are only used for 2 or 3 months a year. There are some industrial wells, particularly as you get nearer the city, near the village. There's some ag non-irrigation wells that are used for processing. There are some dewatering wells for some of the sand and gravel quarries. All those are in the model. In our report, we have some percentages. The vast majority are irrigation wells. Mike, do you want to talk about what you did?
So originally, so the second question was when we were looking at a scenario where there was no pumping at all in the basin, and comparing that to current pumping, how did we do that? And originally, we didn't change the recharge. We just turned off all the wells. But in response to peer review and comments from people that have read the report, we did change the recharge. And we did a relatively simple thing. We took all of the sort of quote-unquote natural recharges. So there was the land covers being pine trees, broadleaf, and grassland. And looked at what those were average over the basin and replaced all of the agricultural land with those. So it was to simulate as if there had never been agriculture. And we took the average of that. We also made calculations using each one individually, but the average was pretty representative. There wasn't a huge change. So. And that's completely hypothetical thing to look at.
Anybody in the top section? YouTube, there you go. The middle of page 3 there. Yes.
Hi, I have 3 quick questions. Ken, you talked about if they did a central sand study, how much would that cost? 2, would the representatives and the senators here be willing to find funding to fund the cost of that study? And 3, is the DNR changing their mission statement related to wells and water, groundwater protection? Thank you.
Well, I don't know about their mission statement. I'll let them answer that. Senator Lassa asked us for an estimate a month or so ago, and we estimated $750,000. That's right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, and the other questions, give it to the front row or to DNR, I guess. I don't know what the mission statement is. So.
Are we changing our mission? No, we're not changing our mission statement.
3 quick questions and 3 quick answers. They can. All right, over here. Sir, you've had your hand up for a while.
You're talking about up to a 30% reduction due to the wells in the study area. Okay. Is that to get back to the public rights stage, or is that to maintain the public rights stage?
Yeah, that was, so the scenario that we looked at, I apologize for going a little into the weeds here, but that was the steady state scenario. So that is sort of average conditions over a long period of time based on the model. And currently, looking at that steady state solution, the flow was below the public rights flow. So that 30% was looking at, if you had just applied the same reduction to every single well that was in the area, how much would you have to reduce to come back to the public rights flow? So that's where that number came from. And the reason that I looked at that was because it was an experiment for myself to understand the depletion potential a little bit better. Because if you apply the same exact result to every well in the area, even wells that have a very small impact and wells that have a very big impact get treated the same. And in one sense, that seemed really fair to me. But then you start to realize that it's pretty inefficient in terms of how much overall reduction there has to be in the basin, as opposed to focusing in on wells with higher depletion potential. So that was the reason for that experiment.
Okay, and as long as I have you,
Okay.
The hypothetical question pumped at you said that they were going to be pumped at a prorated rates. Okay, that wells were pumped at prorated rates. Are those the numbers where it said 9 inches for potatoes and 7 inches for corn, and is that what Is that what the prorated rate, when the wells were pumped at prorated rates? Is that what the prorated rates were?
The maximum reduction.
The reduction.
Sorry, I don't remember using the term prorated, so I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
I think it's you.
I don't think it was you.
Oh, it was Ken? Oh, sorry.
I did? Yeah. All right. So I don't remember using that word either, but ask your question again. Maybe I'll get it this time.
You were saying in a hypothetical situation that the wells were being pumped, I think leading up to, how much they could be pumped, that they were being pumped at prorated rates. And the question I had was, because you had just shown different crops using different amounts of irrigation.
Okay.
And so when you consider those prorated rates, were those those numbers? Okay, when you're saying
no,
it was pumped at the rate that certain crops over the area, percentage used in different areas.
Well, I'm not sure I remember what I said there, but what I think the point is that we use the actual well pumping that's been reported by the well owners. Okay, so the numbers we used are real numbers for pumping. What we had to calculate was how much irrigation, where did that water go? We know it got pumped out. What happened to that water? How much of it evaporated? How much of it, when it was irrigated? How much soaked into the ground? And that's why we have to look at what kind of crop there was there. So I think that's maybe where that's coming from. I don't quite remember that exact statement, but we do look at the different crops and the size of the field and all those things when we make that calculation.
I guess on those last slides where you showed that 30% solution and then you showed the more efficient solution as you described it, both of those were designed or meant to illustrate getting back to public rights feature levels. Does anybody have the authority to make one of those solutions or some mix of those solutions actually happen? Like, what is the impact of the public rights level, and is it going to be voluntarily how we get there, or is it going to be because of something else?
That's for you.
I really don't want to answer this one. Well, so you're asking if we have the authority to impose those types of restrictions. Not surprisingly, it's a complicated issue. We're not aware that we've ever set a public rights flow or stage related to groundwater withdrawals. Typically, it's related to some action on a surface water. Like if you have a dam, we'll set a public rights stage for how much water you have to allow passing over that dam. So in theory, yes, we have a public rights flow. We have 424 wells contributing something to the reduction in flow. So do we have the authority? People have argued, yes, we do, under the statutes that relate to protection of navigable waterways. And under that authority, it would be essentially a nuisance action, and we would have to file a claim or an action against essentially all the users in the area. And it would go to a judge, and a judge would make the decision and try to apportion I guess, blame or however you want to term it. And they would be the ones who, we would have to make a recommendation, but my point is it would be a very difficult threshold to meet. And it would be a long, extended process. Think about just relatively straightforward projects that we deal with, like, and people aren't going to think these are straightforward, but like a Richfield Dairy, even Golden Sands, where you're dealing with one project and a relatively small number of wells contributing to a problem. Think about the litigation involved in those projects, and then try to expand that to a whole basin, bringing in 400 and some wells, and I'm not sure how many well owners, but it would be a very difficult task. So again, our desire and approach that we intend to follow is continue with working with the stakeholders, as I mentioned, in a collaborative way, and try to get voluntary participation and cooperation. We think the model will help us do that, and that we'll be able to demonstrate to the stakeholders that, okay, you know, here's what's going on here, and we think we have a good tool now, that we have some visual tools, we have the analysis that we can use, that I think we'll get better cooperation, or I'm hoping that we get better cooperation. So again, we prefer to take that approach rather than try to go down this road of a very long, contested legal battle, which is what would be involved if we took an action to try to force compliance at this point. I think we would be better served continuing with the collaborative approach. You want to add anything?
Thank you. Thank you. My partner here just alluded a little while back about the Golden Sands Dairy Project down in Saratoga. That really is a pretty small area in compared to what your model was here tonight with the Little Plover. That's the 10 Mile Creek watershed is about 74 square miles. Right now split in half. The eastern half irrigated with roughly 40 some wells. Basically 0, 2, or 3 in the Saratoga section. Being that the DNR, you said that they scratched your back a bit with a $250,000 grant to fund this project. Would you be interested in scratching their back and verifying their results as they're evaluating the Saratoga project? And to the DNR, would you be interested in implementing your data that you've collected with their model to verify your results?
How about if I take that one? Okay. So we have some, and thanks for the question. For the Golden Sands Dairy, we have some very experienced hydrogeologists looking at the models produced both by Golden Sands as well as running our own scenarios with the values that we think are appropriate for the groundwater modeling and the stream flow depletion. So I would suggest maybe, Adam, you can raise your hand. Adam's the hydrogeologist working on that model, and I think if somebody has questions on the Golden Sands Dairy afterwards, Adam would be happy to answer kind of any differences in methodologies between what you saw today for Ken and Mike's approach to what we're using at the Golden Sands Dairy. But I feel very confident knowing Adam's work and the extent of the modeling review we did for Golden Sands that I can't say it's 100% compatible with what Mike and Ken did, but it's really close to as best science we can use in that groundwater shed.
And to follow up, Dan, what you heard from Ken and Mike tonight, it's a collaborative effort and we're constantly learning. So the approaches they used on, excuse me, on recharge, on using measured data, those concepts, those applications, the department can use in reviewing and developing our own data sets for other projects like Golden Sands. So it's a constant evolution of learning as we go. So was it a separate model in the Little Plover compared to like a Golden Sands? Yes, but can we learn from it and build on it with other projects? Absolutely.
And I'll just add one thing. You asked if they would be willing to do something for us, and they have been along the way. As Adam has worked on some of the components of the modeling work, he's consulted with people from the 2 surveys, people from various universities. So we have had a fair collaboration and cooperation between the surveys, DNR, and some of the academics.
I sense that we're getting close to the end of questions. Is there anybody in this section? Yes.
I'm coming in the middle of this. I heard that 2005, the Little Plover River went dry. Is that correct?
Yes.
Has it gone dry since then?
I believe it has, but George is here.
No, he left.
Oh, he left? Okay, well, yeah. Yeah.
And then also you said that the municipal waters is a big draw and it's constant. And it's the largest draw probably. I live in Plover, so does that mean that it might be one of the wells that you completely shut off or you put 30% reduction on it? And then if I do my 30% reduction as an individual, does that mean everybody in this room will also have to do the same thing? I think individually everyone has to do their part. I hate the pointing the fingers, and I want to know what the ultimate goal is all of this. What is the ultimate goal of the water issues?
You want to answer the question she asked about the well in the scenario?
Yeah, so actually, if you look at the water use, municipal versus agriculture and industry, the municipal is a smaller portion. It is constant throughout the year, but it's a smaller portion. And with respect to the 30% reduction, that was one example of many. And like people have said earlier tonight, it requires a collaborative solution. And our charge as scientists was to provide a tool to help the people that are collaborating together to evaluate different scenarios and see what changes in water use could achieve the goal of having the public rights flow in the river. And there are a lot of options on the table. So the goal here, though, is to make progress toward understanding what actions would be helpful and what actions wouldn't. And where that goes is up to the people that live in this area to collaborate and find a solution.
Right. Again, and for now, we're talking about voluntary cooperation between the various stakeholders. So the agricultural interests, municipal interests, industrial interests, they're all contributing something to the problem. So our ultimate goal is to balance groundwater use, make it, try to get it to a point where it's sustainable in terms of using groundwater, but also having healthy flows in the stream. I mean, that's ultimately our goal, is to allow groundwater use, but not to the detriment of the surface water or other water resources. And again, right now, we're looking at a voluntary approach. If the legislators, give us some new tools from a legislative perspective, maybe we'll look at, maybe at some point in the future, it would go beyond voluntary measures, and we may have a regulatory mechanism in addition to the collaboration. But initially, our goal is to work collaboratively to try to improve the situation, get to a point where groundwater use is sustainable with healthy flows in the river.
Why don't we take one or two more questions on this end, and then I think the panelists will all be available if you want to ask a specific question after we're done. But before everybody leaves,
right here. There you go, buddy.
We'll go one here and one up on the top. Yes, here.
We all know water flows downhill. The water from the Little Plover River goes down into the Wisconsin River, to the Mississippi River, and down into the Gulf of Mexico. What effect would there be if we put some dams in to hold 30% of the water back? And there used to be dams in there, and for whatever reason, they got removed.
So the question was, could we put dams in to hold the water back? You're talking about dramming what? The drainage ditches, I suppose? Holding water back to the headwaters of the Little Plover River. Or holding, well, if that's certainly that's a scenario that would indeed make a difference, but there's, if you're damming water up, there's consequences to how the river functions then. So, that's an approach that might have some benefit, and probably would have some benefit as far as water levels, but you may be flooding land too. I mean, the drainage ditches were put in, I believe, because some people thought the water table was too high. So, again, it's all a question of what people want, I think, and what's best for the whole community, including the environment and the people that live and work there. And we can't make that decision. That's a complicated thing.
Okay, down here in the front.
This is basically after that question, probably a good follow-on. And also, based on the earlier question about cover crops and how water gets absorbed into the ground and how to best do that with whatever you're covering the ground with, to retain that for water capture. And then with the city, use of the runoff again. And once that water runs off, it's gone. It's down the stream. It's not going to be held back in the water table. So I guess along with that same concept, what is the topography in the area, and how many wetlands are we doing away with in this area and any other area potentially in this, the larger area around here? And how does wetlands, again, that removal figure into keeping that water table as high as you can keep it?
Well, there's certainly we are simulating some wetlands in the model. I don't have, I really don't have a good handle on if wetlands are being removed in this area. Is that do you guys?
I think the question was, are the wells having impacts on the wetlands in the water?
Oh, I see. Are the wells having impact on the wetlands? I didn't. Yeah, sure, it would. Yeah, yes. Wetlands have different. There are different wetlands. Some wetlands are discharged wetlands, water is flowing in. Some are recharged wetlands where water is flowing out, and it depends where you are in the watershed. I mean, and how the individual wetlands function. And generally, it's good to keep wetlands around. You are right. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, in the white, I think you had a question, and we'll wrap up after you're done.
My question tries to put a couple of things together here. Larry, you mentioned earlier on that the data sets have gotten better. Since 2006 and 2011, you're pretty confident. And the woman up here in the center asked about use and if there was some sort of regulation in terms of reduction of water use. Both of these questions center on the whole idea of actually collecting the data and tracking the water. In the first case, water out of the ground. In the second case, water usage. So it's my understanding that currently we're tracking water out of the ground based on electric bills, that there are not flow meters that are actually in place on high-capacity wells in Wisconsin. My question is, in order to put flow meters on as a condition for permitting, for example, would that be a DNR initiative, or would it be a legislative initiative? And would it be a benefit in terms of data collection and as we move forward on additional modeling, say, for the Central Sands?
So there's a requirement that, that every high-capacity well have a means of measuring flow. Some have flow meters. Those that have a variable speed pump, so they can pump at different rates. They have to have a totalizing flow meter, just like the water meter in people's homes that are provided water by a public water supply. It'll keep track of the gallons of water that go through that pipe. Others have hour meters, where they know the flow rate out of the well, and it tracks how many hours or how many minutes that pump operated during the month. So it's a simple calculation of hours times the flow rate. I know some wells do rely on electrical usage, which is, I think, what you said. At least that's what I heard you say. Yeah, I mean, some do that, but again, we typically do require that they have meters on the well itself to either measure hours of operation or, in the case of variable speed pumps, actual flow. We've been doing that since 2008, and we have an administrative code that talks about water use reporting and acceptable measures of reporting use, and that's where you'd find that. So would it help to have better data? Yes. But in looking at the data that we have, that has been submitted to us since 2011, and and Bob up in the audience has done a fair amount of analysis of data, comparing it to weather data, and he looks at all sorts of things. And, his conclusion is that, again, since 2011, we have a pretty high set of data in terms of water use, that we have a high level of confidence.
So back to the final question was, though, is it the DNR's prerogative to require the type of monitoring, meters, whatever, or is that legislative action?
Well, it's specified in rule right now. There is an administrative rule that identifies what type of meter you need for whatever type of water withdrawal or water use you have. So it's in rule right now. And the rule was written under the authority of the Great Lakes Compact and also under the authority of our existing high-capacity well law, which gives us the authority to require water use reporting. No. No, it applies statewide. But that was the authority. Under the compact, and Eric can maybe answer a question tonight.
We're not changing our mission.
But under the compact, it requires statewide reporting, whether you're in the Great Lakes Basin or not. Right?
A man of many words. Thank you for the questions, ma'am. And thank you for everyone for the very, very thoughtful questions. And I'm sensing now that some of the questions could also be very easily answered and may not be of broad interest to everybody. So I'm going to bring it to a close and in a minute just ask the elected officials to say a few words if they choose. But in the meantime, on behalf of Ken Bradbury, Mike Fienen, Larry Lynch, Eric Ebersberger, and Dan Helzel, we want to really thank you all for taking the time to come out here tonight. And we also want to thank again Chancellor Patterson's office and all the wonderful staff, the technicians and folks that helped us out. They spent a tremendous amount of time prepping and getting us ready for this, and we really want to acknowledge them and all the other people that made this event happen tonight. So with that, I want to turn it back to Senator Lassa and her colleagues.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I think that the presentation was wonderful, and there were a lot of really good questions that were asked. They were very thoughtful, and I'm hoping that the presentation tonight, and I realize that the optimization model that will be out later on this summer, but the fact is that it's an opportunity for us to really move this discussion forward and to talk about the possibilities and bringing all the stakeholders together at the table, because now we have a tool to be able to look at our groundwater usage and to come up with a solid management plan. And I think that is really possible by having all of the stakeholders at the table. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank the legislators who worked with me to submit the letter to the DNR asking for this presentation tonight, and I appreciate that you gentlemen granted that request, and that was Senators Coles, Olson, and as well as Representative Krug, Vandermeer, Shanklin. And then for Senator Miller for joining us tonight as well. But also thanks to the USGS as well as the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey, Ken. Thanks for all your good work. I also thank UWSP for hosting this event tonight. It really was a lot of work, and they really worked well with us. And I also want to put a plug in for my staff person, Ben Van Pelt, who really coordinated with everyone to make sure this meeting went off without a hitch. So thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to continuing this discussion well into the future.
You're good.
Good evening, and thank you for your patience and your concentration in listening. I want to thank our scientists for sharing your methodology with us this evening and bringing that common understanding to all of us. I think this is a great starting off point for our discussions as we move forward, and I do look forward to further research into the hydrology area. So once again, thank you very much, and just a special hello to a number of my constituents who joined us tonight. Thank you.
I'll take a couple of questions.
Will you
quick.
take questions? I appreciate this panel incredibly, but science has never been the problem here in Wisconsin. You guys voted for a bill at the end of the session that would grant total exemption from any review for high-capacity wells. Both of you voted for that. Can you explain your rationale given the research we've just heard?
So I'll include that in my brief comments here. Here's a little time capsule of where we are in Central Sands and legislation that's been proposed and things we've been working on the last 2 or 3 sessions now. In light of some of the things going on in Saratoga, we tried to figure out ways to specifically address that situation in the wider scheme of things. So I worked on a bill, AB 477, where we tried to give, and where it comes back down to is trust. We tried to give DNR, and you guys do a great job, so it's not on you, but a lot of people, we wanted to give DNR more authority in certain parts of the state to do more scientific research, right? The bill didn't cross the finish line. So the bill behind it, the GUDEX version of a bill, a high cap bill that we worked on, we worked to put those provisions into that as well. A little watered down, but still a chance to include more watershed-based research, which when everybody asked about the price tag to say $750,000 to do the Central Sand study, that's not the problem. The problem is the patience. The problem is the waiting for the results. The problem is to take the time to understand that we're not going to take those implementation actions until those studies are done so we have the information we need. So when that vote comes down to those bills at the end of this session, that's what those votes are for, is to include those other 3 watersheds within the Central Sands to fully optimize their modeling. If you look at some of the Saratoga area, that's going to be modeled already. Little Plover's modeled already. We're going to include 3 more watersheds for modeling and optimization. That's a big step. That's something we needed to do. That's what that bill included that didn't even get passed after it got through the Assembly to the Senate. So when you talk about where we're going to go with legislation moving forward, we do have to keep doing this. We do have to add more models. We do have to keep optimizing the models. We do have to do more studies. Senator Miller, we do. And I'm sorry that you don't agree, but we do. We're sitting here talking about the Little Plover optimization and the studies that are going on in Little Plover, the data that we're getting from this is going to be highly valuable and crucial to what goes on in the rest of the Central Sands. And I know individual water bodies have had studies done, but when you're looking at watershed type studies and the domains for those watersheds, the studies we have now are a lot smaller. They're a lot older. Things need to be updated. Things need to be increased. So when you talk about studies that were done in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that's when we had 500 high cap wells, not 4,000 high cap wells. We do have to keep doing this. And it is part of the project that we're going to keep working on in legislation moving forward. So $750,000 in the grand scheme, it's not the problem. It's the time to let the models, we have to let the science do the work. That's what we're doing. What the bill did is said that as long as everybody's no, I didn't vote for that bill. I wrote the substitute amendment for the bill, but I didn't vote for the bill. So here's what the actual bill does. So when you have a high cap well approved, you have certain conditions you have to follow. Every high cap well throughout that bill, whether the bill passed or not, still to follow every condition that was placed on it when it was granted. So if it went outside the conditions, you're going to have issues with it. If it stays within the conditions, we're not going to have a problem with it. But what they're doing right now is finding exactly where. Well, what they're doing right now is finding exactly where we can find out where we can reduce those water flows and the pressures on those wells. You can't.
That's a great question. So
Back in the 2009 session, Senator Miller and Representative Black did also the same type of thing, and it didn't even pass in that caucus. So we're still working on getting these things passed through the last 3 legislative sessions. And it wasn't good enough in 09 either. We're still trying on both sides across the board.